This next talk is from Niall O'Donnell. Niall is a software developer at Plymouth Software as well as a student at Plymouth University. In this talk, he's going to be diving into the history of web design and trying to draw out some of the trends which we probably should still be using today, as well as some which should probably be forgotten as soon as possible. Enjoy the talk, folks.
Hello, I'm Niall O'Donnell and I'm going to be giving you a talk on the history of web design today. You may be wondering who I am. I'm a student at the University of Plymouth and I study computer science. I'm also currently working as a software developer at Plymouth Software, one of the sponsors for today's event. And that's all you need to know about me, so buckle up and get ready as we dive into the history of that weird thing we call the internet. The history of web design. Okay, it doesn't sound too interesting, and I wouldn't blame you if you thought the next 15 minutes were going to feel something a little bit like this. But hopefully it won't, because I'm not just talking to you today about the history of web design. I'm talking to you about why you should care. Why does it matter that someone designed a website the way they did 10 years ago when you're pushing out content online today? Why does it apply to you, or me, or anyone that hosts content online with their own website? Well, how about the fact that 75% of your consumers will be judging your credibility based purely on web design alone? Clearly, web design has a huge impact and can really make a difference to your business. Whilst you think on that, I do just want to quickly present a different scenario. You're on your way to get a new car. So you go out and you explore and you go into the first car dealership you find. And you're greeted by this person. You think that's a good deal. You look around, but then you go out to a second car dealership and you're greeted by this person. Now, both of those people were on screen for less than a second, and yet your brain subconsciously has already determined different things about them, how organized they may be, how trustworthy. This because your brain only takes 50 milliseconds to make a first impression of someone. I mean, that's only half a second. Pair that with the 75% of your customers that are basing your credibility just on that impression. And that doesn't look good if your web design's outdated or just plain bad. Yeah, but Niall, what's that got to do with the history of web design? The history of web design is important because you don't want your users thinking that your web design is old or outdated. So if you know what came before and why, you know what to avoid, where to look for future trends, and hopefully your users will enjoy a modern, up-to-date and user-friendly experience. So finally, let's actually delve into the past of the internet, taking it all the way back to the 90s when it first began. The early 90s, the dawn of a new technological age, when this man, Tim Berners-Lee, created the World Wide Web in 1991. It looked a little bit like this. Because at this point, the web pages were just pages with text and hyperlinks, not even images. And that didn't come until a year later, and thanks to Tim, again, the very first image was uploaded to the internet, and it was this. How did that get in there? The actual first image ever uploaded on the internet was this. Now, where there's media, there's marketing, and in 1994, the very first advertisement banner went live on a website, and it looked like this. Nowadays, if you don't already have an ad block, this looks like a virus waiting to happen. You click this, and your computer's going to explode. But at the time, it was incredibly successful. 44% of users that went onto the site clicked on it. And when you did, it looked like this. Still very basic websites, because and it wasn't until the next year that CSS and JavaScript actually became a thing. Between both JavaScript, which allowed for increased functionality in websites, and CSS, that gave way for greater creative control, the late 90s web design shifted away from the plain text hyperlinks we've seen before. A lot further away. The general population still hadn't built an intuition with navigating the web, and so in order to help them, web designers believed in giant buttons, flashy banners, and enough colour to make a rainbow feel nauseous. Here are some websites to look at, and you might recognise a few of the companies. And of course, an infamous website from the late 90s is Space Jam, embodying all the trends we've seen from this time period. Please stop spinning. An important year from this time period was 1998, as it brought about some key arrivals: CSS2, Google, and me. Yep. Everything I've spoke about so far is older than me. The early 2000s saw a shift in how people use the internet. This era is known as Web 2.0, and the rise of social media allowed people to connect in a way that they'd never done before. The trends of web design also shifted, moving away from glaring colours and crammed pages to more focus on readability and navigation. This can be seen in sites such as MySpace, YouTube, and Reddit. Some trends from the 90s did stick around, however, with the $1 million homepage being a prime example. On this site, companies could buy pixels to advertise themselves at the price of $1 per pixel. These trends did fade, however. As graphics improved, coding languages became more advanced, and new technology like the iPhone was released, websites had to become more responsive, and a trend known as skeuomorphism emerged. Skew what now? Skeuomorphic design is when a visual element represents its real-life counterpart. An example of this, the old Instagram logo, made to represent a Polaroid camera. The rise of this trend was largely due to the popularity of the iPhone. Apple's skeuomorphic app designs was in the palm of everyone's hands, and web design reflected this. Here we can see some websites that heavily rely on this skeuomorphic design. At this point, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, this is the history of web design bit, but why should I care again? The reason is, from the plain text of the early 90s to the realism of the early 2000s, web design has been heavily influenced by the technology available to the designers. If CSS hadn't evolved, we wouldn't have the web designs we have today. So it's important to us to realise that not only should we keep on top of design trends, but also on top of technological advancements that could help shape the designs that we want to create. As we get closer to modern day, there are a few key things to note to understand why web design changed the way it did. Developments in things like CSS Flexbox, Bootstrap, and creative suites such as the Adobe Suite allowed for new creative techniques and freedom. Another thing to note is that as the internet became more accessible with laptops and smartphones, more and more people were on the web, and because of that, it became more standardized and more intuitive. No longer do you need a realistic home to represent your home page. People know that if you click on the icon normally in the top left, that will take you back to the home page. So what are the design trends from 2010 to present? Well, I'm going to say a few words, and I think you'll recognize some of these from websites you've used in the past few years. parallax, minimalism, and flat web design. Thumbs. One of the reasons that web design became more flat and minimalistic. With more and more people using their phones, cluttered and skeuomorphic designs just were difficult to use. So a minimalist and flat design really allowed for users to have easy navigation on their mobile devices. In 2012, media queries were introduced, which allowed CSS to track the screen size and adjust accordingly. So now we're up to date with websites that you could find on your everyday use. So, on to the last bit. Whew. It's over. We just made it through the past 30 years of web design history. And I hope somewhere along the way you learn what trends happened and why they happened. And now I'm going to show you a series of websites, and I want you to think to yourself what time period you think that these websites were active in. Ready? Now, you may have a rough idea of what time periods those websites were active in, but before I tell you, I just want to make a link to what I said earlier about user judgment. That half a second that they have to get an impression of your website is exactly the same as the impressions you got of the websites I just showed you. And trick question, all those websites are still active. So unless you want your website to fall into a similar category, you have to keep up to date with design trends and technology so that your users don't get the same impression you just got of those websites. So what are the key takeaways I want you to have learned from this talk? 1, be aware of the impact your web design has on your users and the limited amount of time you have to make that impression. 2, keep up to date with modern technology as well as design trends. Knowing what tools you have at your disposal can severely impact how well you're able to shape the ideas you have. And 3, have a good day. I hope you enjoy the rest of the presentations, and thank you to Tony and his team for delivering this somehow in this crazy lockdown situation we're in. That's all. I'm Niall O'Donnell, and thanks for listening to my talk.